welcome to Radio Friends on Friday, October the 31st. This is Halloween. I'm shaking in my boots right now because we've got a spooky story. Good morning. Larry Brown. Larry Brown is with us, and you have a Halloween story for us.
Of course.
What's it about?
You'll have to wait.
All right. It's a long one, so why don't we get right into it then? Here is Larry Brown with our special Halloween story.
At first, it started as just a series of annoyances. A dripping faucet, the lights would go on and off, doors would close and open at their own, and sometimes the temperature would rise or cool off. Jim and Ruth and their two boys, Joey and Sam, had moved into the house a couple of years ago. It was new to them, but it shouldn't be having all of these mechanical problems. And one by one, Jim would see what was wrong, and again, his conclusion was it wasn't a mechanical problem. Well, as they began to talk about it, those mysterious occurrences, those annoyances, were happening with some regularity. They tended to be, from say 6 in the evening till about midnight. And as they thought about it, they were mostly on Thursday nights, sometimes Friday. Well, it was a little embarrassing to have folks over, so they didn't on Thursday night in case something would happen. And then Ruth remembered, down the street and across the street, about a block away from where she worked, was a place that sold odd, strange, and curious things, sometimes things of the occult, and she'd noticed the little sign said psychic reader. And so she met a Mrs. Logan who agreed to come out to see what was wrong with the house. Well, she came in. They had sent the kids out to a babysitter. She came in. They made a little circle with candles, and she did some chants and, sort of reading the situation. And when it was over, she said, "I find nothing strange here. There's no poltergeists. You aren't, house is not built on a cemetery. Nothing I can do for you." And they said, "Well, but you weren't here on Thursday night." So she agreed to come back on Thursday night. Well, Thursday night, they sent the kids away to a babysitter, met Mrs. Logan at the door. As soon as Mrs. Logan stepped up to the door, the lights went out in the house. There was a cold wind that began to whip back and forth. Blew her right out to the front of the house. Well, she picked herself up and she said, "I don't know, there's something in this house, but I don't know what it is." And she was out of there. Well, the next Thursday night, the lights went out. Jim went to see about it. He went to get a flashlight. The boys had their flashlights. The flashlights wouldn't work. Nothing electrical would work. Jim went out to the car to get a flashlight. He came back in. The door was locked. He couldn't back in. Ruth was panicking. She took the kids back to the bedroom. Jim went around, opened the sliding door onto the patio, and as they all gathered in the kitchen and found an old lamp to light, there was an old kitchen cabinet dancing out into the middle of the room, as if it was a miniature earthquake. Pots and pans and utensils seemed to circle about and then gathered around. Without hesitation, Jim just shoved that old cabinet right out that open patio door. He said, "Where did we get that?" Well, Ruth said, "Well, we got it in a garage sale a couple of years ago, about the time we moved into this house." "Well, it's out of here now." And sure enough, the lights came back on, the temperature, the wind calmed down. But the next Thursday night, it was a trunk, an old trunk up in the bedroom, the same thing, as if it had a life of their own. Well, they called back up Mrs. Logan and said, "You got to tell us something else." And she said, "Well, I know this old man, a retired priest, Father Daniel Vaskevich. I heard that he once did exorcisms." "Ah, exorcisms." Well, they got a hold of Father Vaskevich, and he agreed to come out on a Thursday night. Well, they met him. As a car pulled up, an old nun got out and got a wheelchair out of the trunk, went around and took the old priest in the wheelchair, with a big black book in one hand and some other things, and immediately he began to start an exorcism ritual. There were chants, there were prayers, there were responses, there was the sprinkling of holy water, there was the sign of the cross on them, on the house. This went on, and as he did, the house lights went out. And that cold wind began to whip around. At some times you could hear the wind and couldn't hear the old priest. And at other times the priest's voice would rise up above. "In the name of Christ, I compel you, you and your satanic cohorts, be gone." And then the chant would continue. Back and forth it went for nearly an hour, till finally the house grew still. The lights came on. The old priest was kind of hunched over, and Jim said, "Is it over?" The priest said, "No, but I find no evil here. Perhaps the house is alive and doing its own cleansing." And with that, the nun wheeled him back to the car and they were gone. Jim and Ruth noticed that none of the neighbors had come out, all this commotion, but everything seemed to be normal in the neighborhood. But they knew what they needed to do. The very next day, they got a temporary apartment, they got a U-Haul truck, they arranged to put that house on the market, and before next Thursday, they were gone. It was a few weeks later. The Carter family was driving through the neighborhood looking for a possible house to buy. And Evelyn said, "Stop, look." And they saw the for sale sign out in the front of the house waving. She said, "Look, the sign is waving as if it's saying hello. And look, the door is opening. That house must want us."
Mm-hmm.
I call that story housekeeping.
So we don't know what happened then, do we?
No, we don't.
But the house, the sign was waving and the door was opening for them to come in.
Next victim.
Okay. That's a really good story, Larry. That's a good story.
Thank you.
Is that a true story?
It's my new story I created just for Halloween.
That's good. That's good. I couldn't help but keep thinking about the movie Poltergeist when you were telling that story.
Well, that's why Mrs. Logan said they weren't buried on a cemetery.
Yeah. Okay. But you see, people come and see you tonight. You're going to be appearing tonight.
Yes, at the Talking Horse Theater, 7:00 tonight. We're doing a
special Halloween presentation.
Special Halloween concert. There'll be a number of storytellers all doing spooky tales.
Okay. Okay. And if people want your CDs or DVDs, or if they want you to come out and tell some spooky stories, how do they get in touch with you?
They may contact me at brownstory@hotmail.com. Check out my website, www.brownstory.com, and there'll be information for you there, too.
Yeah. I remember several years ago, on, I think it was Halloween night or the night before Halloween, you were at the library.
Yeah.
And James and I came out to listen to you tell stories. And Larry, I live out in the country. And
you had to go home in the dark.
I drove home in the dark.
Well, you will have to tonight, too, you know.
That's right. You're a pretty good storyteller. And I tell you, I had the hair on my, in Hawaii they call it chicken skin. I had the goosebumps listening to your stories.
Well, beware tonight.
Great. Thank you, Larry. Okay,
welcome.
now stop it. You can get out of character now. We're out of time for today. Monday, we've got Columbia Art League and MU Healthcare. Our program directed by Travis McMillan, Reynolds Journalism Institute. Audio, Pat Akers from KBIA. Our floor director is Lowell Thomas, and our assistant producer and guest coordinator, Uncle James Mauser. If you're going to be out and about tonight, especially with the little ones, be careful. Bye-bye.